My name is Steve. I'm 36 years old. Today is May 1st, and in just a few days, it'll be exactly 10 years since my divorce. We were married for 2.5 years. I like to call it the anniversary of my divorce. Today, I want to tell you about that day, and, keeping with tradition, open a bottle of dry sparkling wine. But first, let me explain how I even got married at 24. 2 years before the wedding, when I was 22, I started working as an architect. I got a job at a design company's office. Since I was the youngest and didn't have a college degree, I often stayed late, working long into the night. Back in 2006, YouTube wasn't even really around yet. I spent time on a dating site called Occupid, where I met the woman who would become my wife. She was 2 years younger than me, in her second year of law school. We swapped numbers and met up in a park a couple of days later. After some texting and a few more meetups, I ended up at her place about 10 days later. One day, her mom came home early, and we met. I remember sitting in a tiny kitchen, about 60 square feet, while her mom cooked something, served me food, and asked all the usual questions: who I was, where I worked, where I studied, stuff like that. Not long after, we went to meet her grandmother and uncle. I got the feeling that her grandma didn't like me right away, maybe even instantly, because she said something like, "He's clearly a player." I still remember that phrase clearly. But somehow, I managed to win her over too, even though I had to answer the same questions again. During the 2 years we dated before getting married, we saw each other every single day. There wasn't a day when her mom asked her to go to the family cottage without me, and if I couldn't go because of work, Clara just stayed home. She wouldn't go anywhere without me. Even when I didn't have a job and no money, I'd walk 4 or 5 miles to see her, and then the same distance back, whether it was raining or snowing. On my birthday in November, I proposed. It felt like it was either time to move forward or end things. I chose to keep going, even though there were already some big problems, like jealousy and her mood swings. Still, I proposed. Our wedding was simple, with about 40 guests in a nice restaurant. I've never liked big parties, and that hasn't changed. In 2008, there was another economic crash, and things got tough. I suggested we just go to the courthouse and get married quickly. Clara agreed, but her mom said she'd pay for a proper wedding. A week before the wedding, I got sick with a fever, but I recovered in time with some medicine, and in early March 2008, we had our wedding. So we were married. She was finishing her degree, and I was freelancing from home for a firm in New York. But almost every week, she would freak out about me going out at 7 p.m., even if I was just meeting a client 5 minutes away at the mall. Since I didn't have an office, I usually met clients in malls and sometimes invited them to our place. We lived separately from our parents, in my mother-in-law's apartment. A few times, Clara told me I needed to get a real job. I wasn't sure what she meant, and I didn't ask. I'll just say my freelance income was definitely more than what local architects were making. About 1.5 years into the marriage, her constant tantrums got so bad that I left for New York, or more exactly, Newark, where my first love, Andrea, lived. Since I was being accused of cheating all the time anyway, I thought, why not actually do it? But there wasn't anyone right there, so I figured I'd meet Andrea. We sneaked into a hotel, got to the room, I drank some wine, and she couldn't because she was breastfeeding. Maybe that's why nothing happened between us. At some point, I realized that the breast I saw wasn't really mine anymore. It belonged to her baby. So we just lay there, talked, and I left without doing anything. When I came back home to Clara, I told her I was done and wanted to separate. But after a lot of promises from her to change, and she actually did for a while, we stayed together. Whenever we went shopping for clothes or shoes, she used to hug me and thank me afterward, no matter whose money we spent. The last time we went shopping together, she didn't say thanks. Around that same time, she came home from a waxing appointment and asked if I thought she was still beautiful. She had never asked that before. Not long after, she said she wanted to whiten her teeth. That month, I bought her a bottle of Chanel perfume, and for myself, Dior Sauvage, which I still wear today. That same month, for the first time ever, I spent a night away from home. I went to scout a route for a trip I was planning with friends, and Clara. We planned a trip to Horseshoe Bend, about 130 miles from Phoenix, along the Colorado River, on Friday, May 1th. Clara, some of my friends, and a few people I didn't know were supposed to come too. It was only the second time in her life that Clara said she wouldn't go with me, blaming the cold night air in the tent, and her mom backed her up. It was weird, though, since she'd never complained about the cold before. I was supposed to ride my bike alone in the morning, while Clara and my friends would come later by car after they finished work. So on Friday, May 1th, 2015, at 10 a.m., after Clara had left for her job at the bank, I packed my backpack, put on my sneakers, and, for some reason, decided to leave a voice recorder on top of a kitchen cabinet. I grabbed my bike, my backpack, and my tent, and left the apartment. Around noon, just as I was leaving the city, Clara called me, but I didn't answer. A friend called too, saying Clara was bugging him, asking when I was coming back. By 2 p.m., I had ridden about 20 miles out of the city. I kept ignoring the calls. By 3 p.m., I reached a crossroads and wasn't sure which way to go. I tried flagging down a car to ask for directions, but no one stopped. They probably thought I was just a tired cyclist looking for a ride. By 5 p.m., I had covered almost the whole distance. Still, I didn't answer the phone. Around 7 p.m., I stopped at a store to grab some beef jerky and a few other basics. I still didn't answer any calls. By 7:30 p.m., I got to Horseshoe Bend and picked a spot for our camp. Some guys came over and tried to challenge me with a strong handshake, like they were questioning why I was taking up so much space. But I used to be a pianist. Try squeezing my hand. They got the idea from my grip and backed off, especially after I told them 5 cars were still coming. At 8 p.m., my friends hadn't arrived yet, and I was starving. I wondered how many calories I had burned biking 130 miles. I went over to a nearby camp to ask for some water. They gave me half a bottle, which helped a little. But I still didn't answer the phone. At 8:30 p.m., the wind picked up and it looked like rain was coming. The nearby campers packed up their burgers, and I was left sitting there, still hungry. At 8:31 p.m., I was still thinking about food, but I couldn't leave. The nearest store was at least a 30-minute to 1-hour bike ride away. I even thought about digging for worms to get some protein. At 8:32 p.m., my friends finally called to say they were about to leave, even though by then, they should have already been there. Finally, around midnight, they arrived, and I attacked the cookies and beer they brought. One of the girls, Isabella, mentioned that Clara had called her too, but there was nothing important to pass along. I kept ignoring Clara's calls. I don't remember much from Saturday. We hung out in nature, grilled meat, drank beer. I didn't drink a lot, but somehow, I don't remember much. That night, I went into my tent and felt anxious without really knowing why. The others stayed around the fire. I made a sudden decision to head home. I quickly packed my things, said goodbye to my friends and the neighbors at the next camp, and made my way to the highway. I got to a gas station and realized it would take me at least 6 hours to bike home, and I was still a little drunk. I knew I couldn't make it. I called an Uber, and for $250, they drove me home with my bike in the trunk. I asked to be dropped off near my building because there was construction going on and they were building a new subway station nearby. I went up with my bike in the elevator and rang the doorbell, but no one answered. I used my key to open the door. No one was home. I called Clara to ask where she was. She answered in a strange, muddled voice, saying we got married too young. I said, "All right, come home and we'll talk." But she didn't want to and hung up. I called my mother-in-law to ask if she knew where Clara was. She said she was at the cottage and didn't know anything but promised to call her. After a few calls, she told me Clara was at her apartment, the one she lived in before. It was about 15 minutes from our place. I went there. Clara talked to me through the door. I said, "Come on, have some respect. We're married, no need to make a scene for the neighbors." She opened the door, crying, and said again that we had married too young and needed to live separately. I said, "Fine, no problem," but asked for a real explanation for her sudden change, especially after almost a year without any drama. I asked if she had cheated on me. She said no, and that she proudly told everyone at work that she was married. If she said no, I had to believe it. I left her apartment and went back to our place, which was in another building my mother-in-law owned. That's when I remembered the voice recorder. I went to the kitchen. Being tall, I could easily see it still sitting there, and for a moment, I thought maybe Clara had seen it, and that's why she had acted so strange. But I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe just a plumber or electrician visiting. On my computer, I had some audio editing software. I opened the recording and fast-forwarded through it, trying to see where any sound started. Comparing the times, it looked like Clara had come home from work earlier and was calling me and maybe some of my friends. From what I could hear, she was asking when I had left and when I'd be back, even though, as you know, She had already called me and I hadn't answered. Further into the recording, I heard her dial someone. She said, "Hello, how are you?" I couldn't hear the other person. Then she said, "I'm at home. What are we going to do?" I started scrolling faster through the recording. Bits and pieces came through, some about women's shoes, a man's voice, a cat meowing. It was all mixed up. I couldn't understand much. But one thing I knew, I needed a beer. Beer isn't as bad as it sounds, at least for me. Alcohol acts more like a calming thing for me. I've never been aggressive when drinking. In fact, I'm more relaxed. Maybe beer even saved me from doing something stupid that night because, honestly, I was drunk. I pulled myself together and decided to listen carefully from the start. By the way, I forgot to mention that voice recorder was expensive back then, around $1,200. It could record for about 10 hours and pick up sounds from 15 feet away. I'll try to explain what I heard on the recording from that night in our apartment. Clara made a call to a man. She said, "Hello, will you come?" He answered yes. Then I heard a knock, and the door opened. There was some rustling. At first, I didn't know what it was, but later I guessed it was flour wrapping. The cat was wandering around, meowing. Clara had made lasagna. The man sounded about 8 to 10 years older than her, based on their conversation. It seemed like they hadn't known each other long. They were asking each other basic questions, like if it was hard to work at the prosecutor's office or somewhere similar. Their conversation went on for about 3 hours. During that time, he told her everything about himself, that he had fainted once, that his bosses were idiots, that he had visited a psychic, that he had stomach problems, and a bunch of other stuff. He even said he wished they could go to a psychic together. Clara agreed and kept supporting him through all his complaints. Then, from what I could tell, they moved to the living room. Thankfully, not to our bed. I could hear her familiar sighs, and this time, I wasn't the reason behind them. Why the living room? Well, our bed creaked loudly, and the recorder picked up no creaking sounds, so I figured they stayed off it. But maybe I was wrong. Now, no one can tell me for sure. At some point, the recording stopped, probably because the recorder's battery died. I listened to all of this while already pretty drunk. I went again to my mother-in-law's apartment. Clara wouldn't open the door at first, but after some convincing, she let me in. Again, I asked her if she had anything to tell me. Maybe if she had cheated once? But once again, she insisted she was proud to tell everyone at work she was married and didn't need anyone else. That's when I started quoting her own words, and the man's, from what I heard on the recorder. I repeated things about the man's stomach issues, his fainting, and the psychic trip. I asked her about the lasagna. She just stared at me with empty eyes, as if looking through me. I waved my hand in front of her face, and she didn't react at first. After a moment, she snapped out of it. I asked her, "Why couldn't you just tell me honestly? We could have just broken up without all this." Almost 3 years of life together, and here I was wondering what to do next. The woman I had loved and trusted so much had become so different. It was like she was a whole other person. One time, we even had trouble with neighbors. One of them, a manager at a brick factory, thought we had something to do with his power getting cut off, even though it was actually neighbors above or below him. He came banging on our door with 2 thugs. I opened the door, but when I saw who it was, I quickly shut it. Funny thing, I recognized 2 of them. They used to be regulars at a restaurant where I had worked as a waiter a few years earlier. They recognized me too, and started banging even harder on the door. We called the police, but no one showed up. The next day, a little drunk from the New Year's celebrations, I smashed their door, breaking off their door handle. A day later, the same guy came back with an axe and tried to smash our door handle but couldn't break it. This time, the police finally came, about an hour later. That same week, Clara and I decided to get gun licenses. We applied and got them. I bought a Remington 870 shotgun and a Glock 19 handgun. After that, I never saw that neighbor again. His wife, though, always greeted us very kindly. That night, I continued drinking. I took an Uber to the cottage where my mother-in-law was staying. I brought along Behemoth, the cat I had picked up at an Asian market years earlier and given to Clara before our wedding. Still drunk, we stopped at a store after leaving the city to grab another beer. At some point, I asked the driver to pull over. I took Behemoth out to some trees and left him there. Then we drove on to the cottage. I was dead drunk and ended up telling my mother-in-law that her daughter had cheated on me. Meanwhile, the Uber driver went to get more beer. At the cottage that night, actually almost morning, my wife's grandmother, uncle, and niece were all there too. I told them everything, just as it happened. My mother-in-law and the uncle knew the whole story, but of course, The little niece didn't need to hear any of it. I even joked with the grandmother, saying something like, "The player got played by your granddaughter? Remember when you called me a player?" She remembered, and we laughed a little before heading back to the city. I asked my mother-in-law if I could have a couple of weeks to move out of the apartment, but in the end, I packed up and left that very night. Before heading to my wife at my mother-in-law's apartment for the second time, I grabbed a spray paint can. I wrote messages and arrows all over the walls and ceilings pointing to the sofa, smashed the glass frame that had our wedding photo, tore up the picture, and emptied the fish tank where our goldfish were swimming. I think I even smashed the tank and put the broken pieces into the bathtub, along with a couple of adult toys we used to keep. I knew I needed a divorce, but the idea of going through all that in court made me feel sick. Still, I found a lawyer, and we filed for divorce. Clara didn't contest anything. Maybe she knew the recording would leave her with no chance. A few months later, it was official. The marriage was over. The hard part came after. I buried myself in work, taking on any project I could, anything to stay busy. But at night, when I was alone, all the memories came rushing back. The good times, the laughter, the love, all of it now felt ruined by her betrayal. And it wasn't easy to move on. There were days when getting out of bed felt impossible, days when I felt swallowed by the anger and sadness. But with time, with help from friends, family, and a really good therapist, I started to heal. I learned to trust again. I even started dating, though I was very cautious. It took a long time before I could even think about another serious relationship. Now, 10 years later, I can look back with a clear mind, even a little wisdom. I realize what happened says more about her than about me. I didn't deserve what she did. No one does. But I also see now that I came out stronger. I survived something awful, and even though I carry the scars, I'm still standing. I'm stronger, more grateful for the good things I have now. So this year, on the anniversary of my divorce, I'll raise my glass of sparkling wine. Not for her, and not for what we had, but for me. For my strength, my healing, my ability to love and live again. Because in the end, that's what matters, not the pain of the past, but the hope for the future. And I'm ready for whatever comes next. The first day after our split, and when I say divorce, I mean our real, emotional breakup, was May 1st. We officially filed for divorce on 5st, May 2015, just a few days later. I called a moving company and told my friend, who shares the same first name as me, about everything that had happened. He didn't believe me at first, thought I made it up. But once I played him the recording from my computer, he changed his mind fast, and we started loading my things. Meanwhile, Clara was texting my mother's phone, saying she still loved me. I moved back in with my parents, called my mother-in-law to return the apartment keys, and she also asked me to bring her the voice recorder. On the second day after the breakup, I gave her the keys and the recorder. Then I called Clara, and we agreed on a date to go to court, May 1st. On the third day after the split, I set up a new email using my last name, and even made one for Clara. Her Skype account was linked to that email. I changed the password and logged into her Skype to check her messages. I found a conversation with a guy named Ryan, not the same guy she had been with on the sofa. Ryan asked where she had disappeared to. Since it was during working hours, I replied from her account, playing along. I asked if he loved me and if he could turn on his camera. After some hesitation, he did, and I saw he was a couple of years older than me. I asked him a few more questions, pretending to be Clara. He said he was nervous and that his heart hurt. I joked that he should take some valerian. When I revealed who I really was, he admitted it and asked if I knew who he was. I already understood, just another guy. Before signing off, he claimed he hadn't actually slept with Clara but said it was fine because the best was yet to come. I also found some old chats with someone named Ella or Isabella, the same name as one of my friend's girlfriends, where they talked about going to a cafe with some guys. So, on May 5st, we went to the courthouse on Main Street. I completely forgot we had to pay a filing fee. I ran to a bank nearby. Somehow I ended up at the wrong window or something, and the guy behind the glass refused to help me. I lost it and banged on the glass. It was super thick, maybe 3 inches, and the clerk said he would call the police. I told him to go ahead. But in the end, he accepted my payment after all. Later, I wanted to apologize and even planned to bring him a bottle of brandy, but every time I went back, he wasn't there. At court, Clara asked me if I really wanted a divorce. To her, it sounded like an insult. The woman taking our application asked for the reason, and I wrote honestly, infidelity on my wife's part. I also asked Clara to change her last name as soon as possible. A week after filing, I got the voice recorder back from my mother-in-law. Some of my things were still in the apartment, so I called her to arrange picking them up. When I showed up, Clara was caught off guard. She started yelling at me about how I had trashed the apartment and written terrible things on the walls. But my mother-in-law brushed it off, saying it wasn't anything serious. About a month later, on June 5th, Clara called to ask if I would come to court for the final divorce decree. I said I was already ironing my jacket and getting ready. Apparently, if you don't show up, the application gets canceled. So we both went, and they handed us the decree on the courthouse steps. I said goodbye to my now ex-wife and reminded her to change her last name. Then I turned left, and she walked off to the right. I crossed the building to the other side of the river and, from across the street, saw her walking, crying. That evening, after getting divorced, I ended up at a strip club. When I moved into my parents' place back on May 1th, I realized one of my friends, who had been with us at Horseshoe Bend, lived just next door. Of course, I told him everything. We made a plan to celebrate once I had the divorce papers. I showed up fully prepared, dressed nicely, carrying a DSLR camera, some fireworks, and a bottle of sparkling wine. We went downtown, launched fireworks, and filmed it. Then we hit a bar near the courthouse. I even asked how much it cost to break a glass, paid $30, and walked out holding an untouched glass of cognac. On the courthouse steps, I got down on one knee, pulled out the divorce decree, set it on fire, finished my drink, and smashed the glass on the marble steps. But then I realized I was supposed to burn the marriage certificate, not the divorce decree. I had lost the marriage certificate during my move and paid extra to get a copy. So, in the end, I just burned everything I had and drank everything that was poured that night. That night also introduced me to the world of strip clubs, and for a few years after, it became my tradition to visit a bar on October 5th. In the last 5 years, though, I've lost interest in bars, even though I've gone a few times with my new girlfriend. Months, or maybe even a couple of years, after the divorce, I heard from some well-wishers that Clara remarried 6 months later, supposedly to the man she was with on our sofa. Later, people said things between them weren't exactly perfect. One day, while coming back from a hardware store carrying ceiling moldings, I saw her. She was coming home from work. The sidewalks were fenced off, but she tried to slip past me. I stopped her and asked if she had changed her last name yet. Later, I told my informer I didn't want to hear any more news about her. Truthfully, I hadn't wanted to for a long time. You know what I regret most? It's not losing my wife or the person I loved. It's losing my mother-in-law. She was truly a good person. People like to think they're missed after a breakup, but that's just soap opera nonsense. Love fades fast, sometimes faster than you'd expect. Real love has to be mutual. If one person stops loving, it's not love anymore. My ex-mother-in-law really was wonderful. She knew her daughter well, her tantrums, her unstable moods. Whenever Clara went to complain to her, she would always tell her, "Listen to your husband, Steve." Honestly, I've never understood mother-in-law jokes. Those jokes about mothers-in-law were never part of my world. Anyway, Clara grew up in a broken family. Her parents had split up, and it seemed like she was mostly raised by her grandmother, with her mother only stepping in from time to time. When I asked Clara about her father, she always said he was a scoundrel, that he left her mom, didn't pay support, and even used his connections to get her fired from her job. I always wondered where such deep hatred came from between two people who once shared a life and a child. And another thought crossed my mind. Had Clara, without realizing it, repeated her mother's story? Was it somehow in her nature not to understand why a man is needed in a family? We had plenty of scandals and tantrums ourselves. If I didn't tell her what to prepare for tomorrow, scandal. If I wasn't hungry and skipped a meal, scandal. You remember the real job issue? To Clara, a real job was one where you left the house at a set time and came home at a set time. Guess why? After the divorce, married women were completely off limits for me. For a long time, I couldn't even look their way. But later, it hit me. If it wasn't me, it would be someone else. Women don't cheat at gunpoint. They choose it themselves. Those two guys, the one from the sofa and the one from Skype, were the kind of men who constantly needed pity, someone to baby them, someone to feed them valerian drops. Sadly, I wasn't the kind of man who allowed himself to be treated like that, and Clara didn't know how to interact with a man who didn't need mothering. Honestly, if marrying a dog had been allowed, it would have been a perfect match for Clara. Scheduled walks, eating on command, always happy to see you. My relatives, including my father and sister, asked if I wanted to meet with Clara and talk things over. But I could see they weren't worried about my feelings. They were more worried that I might end up moving into their apartment and becoming a financial burden. Even my aunt, who had left her own husband multiple times while preaching that nothing is black and white, everything is gray, stayed friends with Clara. People tend to stick with their own kind, I guess. Cutting ties with close family and friends was one of the hardest parts. It wasn't easy watching them choose Clara's side. But time went on. I made new friends, real friends. Now I have 4 close friends, one of whom is a woman. They're the kind of people you can call at 2 a.m. for a walk, or hop on a plane to Miami with for a few weeks, or sit together in silence for hours, or talk deeply about life, creativity, and hobbies. Clara wasn't the first girl I had ever dated, but she was the first whose parents I met. I didn't have much experience with long-term relationships before her, just short college flings that don't really count. Things with her seemed smooth at first, with some issues my parents didn't love, but I had nothing to compare it to back then. So, I thought, why not get married? It made sense at the time. Several years after the divorce, I understood clearly. Hysterical women are not normal. There are plenty of kind, calm, family-oriented women out there. And even though I now have a lifelong immunity to drama, I know better than to waste my time on people like that. Over the past 10 years, I've had a few healthy, meaningful relationships. For one reason or another, none of them ended in marriage. And you know what? That's okay. Let me leave you with this advice. Don't confuse love with infatuation. Don't confuse infatuation with passion. Don't confuse immigration with tourism. And don't mistake real family life for casual Saturday meetups. On May 1st, today, I've already raised a glass of champagne. Not for the past, but for the idea that everyone gets what they deserve in the end. Honest people find honest partners. Liars and cheaters find their matches too. And if someone thinks they can fake it for half their life and magically turn into a good person later, trust me, life has a way of bringing everything full circle. If not to them, then to their kids.